Hey class, Mr. Stewart here. Week 6, and again, sorry about last week. I was a bit under the weather. The sinus and allergy monster had attacked really hard, and I was coughing a lot. And I don't think there was any way I could have done a integrity lesson last week at all. So sorry about that. But I'm back this week, and we'll get back on track. So this week I'm going to be talking a little bit about chapters 9 and 10. That's in the week 6 learning module for your text. And chapter 9 starts is entitled Preventing Losses from Criminal Actions. Now this is pretty important for private security to understand, because this is where we start to see a difference arise in security duties versus law enforcement duties. Now security has a role to play in regard to criminal acts, but it's not an enforcement role. And that's what I want you to understand. It's a prevention role. Security is there to be a preventative instead of responsive. We're there to be proactive instead of reactive. Law enforcement, by all accounts, is supposed to be proactive, but due to budgets, due to lack of manpower, political issues, honestly, law enforcement has been reactive and will probably continue to be reactive for many years unless some things change. So typically law enforcement gets called once a crime has been committed, and they come respond to it. They react to the crime after it's commissioned. Private security, therefore, can fill a niche so that law enforcement may not even have to be called. If you're somewhere and you're visible and you look like you have some authority, then it may very well be enough to prevent criminal activity. There's also other things that private security can do in a preventative way, so that we don't have to worry about law enforcement being called to respond or react to criminal behavior, because we have successfully prevented those things from happening. We're going to start out and kind of talk about enforcing proprietary rights. Now, proprietary rights are those that a facility has, or a piece of property has, saying, because this is my property, this is my location, here are my rules, and I'm going to hire a private security guard to enforce my rules. Now, understand that these are proprietary. Once you get off of that property, that may not, the rules change, more than likely. Also understand that not all crimes can be prevented, and security officers are expected to act to protect the assets of their employers, and they can't always assume that local authorities are going to be there in time to handle a situation. So sometimes if a situation arises, pardon me, that security professional is going to be the first responder, and they're going to have to begin to deal with something until the proper authorities do arrive. Again, many of these may not be actual violations of criminal code. It simply may be violations of the proprietary rights or rules of the organization or the facility at that particular physical location. Some of those proprietary rights of a security officer are maybe to prevent trespassing, control conduct of persons who are there and are supposed to be there, to make sure that while you're there, you're behaving properly. You do have the ability to defend yourself, others, and property. That's not necessarily to defend with deadly force, but to defend. You can defend property by not letting the wrong person inside, by keeping a gate closed, by denying admittance. You can defend yourself either through a physical altercation, or possibly even the use of deadly force. You do have the ability to defend other people. If somebody is attacking somebody else, you have the right to defend that person. And in many cases, you are expected to do so. And you also have the proprietary right to prevent the commission of a crime. And this is where many security officers begin to feel like, I'm a police officer, or I'm a wannabe police officer, because then they start saying, well, I'm preventing this and I'm doing that and I'm responding to this and responding to that. And that's what police officers do. So I'm just the same as a police officer. They're not the same. They have a completely different focus. We've already talked about that throughout the course, but it's important to continue to reiterate the fact that law enforcement security has a completely different focus, and security is not tasked with enforcement of the law. They may be tasked with enforcement of company rules and regulations, but that changes as soon as you get off of the property. When you get back out into public property, then you have no more right than any other citizen does. So make sure you understand that. Let's talk for just a minute about the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony in regard to criminal offenses. Misdemeanors are your less serious offenses. They typically are punishable by less than a year in jail and a fine of less than $1,000, whereas a felony is a more serious offense. It's punishable by over a year in prison and a fine greater than $1,000. An example of a felony is murder. An example of a misdemeanor is, let's say, a DUI. So you see that we have two different classifications of offenses. We have less serious offenses and more serious offenses. Some of the crimes or criminal offenses that you may be tasked with preventing and responding to on company property are theft, burglary, robbery, trespassing, vandalism, assault, arson, white-collar crime, fraud, or computer crime. Any of those a private security professional may be tasked with, number one, trying to prevent, and number two, if and when they do occur, you're going to be the first responder there, and you're going to be required to act in some sort of official security professional capacity while at that employer location. How do we prevent theft? Well, we can limit access to assets. We can keep the wrong people away from the right stuff, basically. That's why everybody doesn't get a key that opens everything. Employees I'm talking about. Not, some employees only have the ability or the authority to be in one area to do certain things, and they shouldn't do other things, and be in other areas, especially if it's like a defense contractor. Some of the parts and things that are made there, they don't need to take home with them. That's why you have to search their lunch boxes or their purses on the way out to make sure they're not taking something out that they don't need to. So you're limiting their access to those assets. You can use your basic security equipment and procedures to keep the employees from stealing, and use the same equipment and procedures to deter other people who are not employees from stealing from the company. Burglary. Burglary is, and many people get burglary and robbery confused. Burglary is simply when you go onto a property when nobody else is there for the intent to commit a crime on the property. Typically it's stealing. It doesn't have to be, but and you don't have to take anything to be charged with burglary. You can simply be on the premises when you're not supposed to be, and you did not have permission to be there. You can be charged with burglary. The crime that usually happens during burglary is theft, but it could be anything else. You could, if you broke into a property and vandalized it, not only is it vandalism, it's also burglary. Now, robbery, on the other hand, is when you forcibly take something with the intent to permanently deprive whatever it is that you took from someone, and you're using force or the threat of force. Robbery occurs when there are people on the premises and you take it, versus nobody else is there but you, and you take it. So just understand the difference between burglary and robbery. Burglary is a property crime, where robbery is a violent crime, because the potential for injury or death is much higher. in a robbery than it is a burglary. So I already talked about robbery. Some things to prevent robbery. Train employees how to act if a robbery occurs. Don't keep large amounts of cash on hand. Use armed security officers or couriers to transport cash to a bank. Do an escort. If it's a retail business, use strict opening and closing procedures. And don't let anybody you don't know in after dark, or not after dark, but after hours, after closing. I know when I was in college, I was a nighttime closer in a couple different Subway restaurants in the town where I went to school. And so not only was I the only employee there at midnight, but at some point I had to go lock the door, and then I had to clean up. I had to count the money, and I had to make the cash drop into a safe, and all that stuff. And then then I got to leave, and I was probably young enough and naive enough that I really never thought that anybody would have even thought about coming up to me as I was leaving the establishment in order to try to rob me. But we had that happen to another employee, and the employee luckily had put everything into the safe, and the safe was actually in a big concrete block in the back of the store, and the employee did not have the combination to the safe. The safe simply had a slot where you put the deposit in an envelope and put it in the slot, and it was once you let it go, it went to the bottom of the safe, and there was no way to fish it back out unless you took the top of the safe off. You could, I guess, have even maybe chipped the safe itself out of the huge concrete block, but you still couldn't have got into it because it was it was a pretty hefty safe. So somebody approached this person as they were leaving and wanted the closing receipts, the money, and they said, "Don't have it. It's in the safe. I don't have the combination to the safe." And luckily, that person didn't really take it any further than that. They could have, but they didn't. That in those cases, maybe you do need a courier or a security person there until closing time in some places, and we see a lot of places in Huntsville that do have that. The mall has security. And they're there until closing and after to make sure that everybody's safe. So, just understand the presence of security can do a lot to prevent criminal activity. Here, PowerPoint talks about some things to do if robbed. You can read over that. Trespassing and vandalism. Typically, we use physical controls and procedural controls to stop both of those. Most of the time, trespassing and vandalism are caused by people who do not have authorized access to the property. And so maybe you have fences, maybe you have perimeter guards, or plenty of lighting, surveillance cameras. All of those things are very good at trying to prevent trespassing and vandalism. Your PowerPoint tells it right here. Use lighting, use signs, security patrols, use strict access controls. That doesn't mean that it's going to prevent every single act of trespassing, or it's going to prevent every single act of vandalism, but it's going to go a long way to preventing a lot of it if you're using good physical controls and good procedures. Assaults do happen sometimes on an employer's premises. Sometimes you can prevent them, and sometimes you can't. Some things to keep random assaults from occurring: good lighting, plenty of security patrols, communication systems such as emergency phones, or the light poles with like an intercom system on them, escort services to parking areas. I know one of the things that we did at another school where I taught was we had a residential school, and we had what we called a dorm walkback program, and we had students who typically they were criminal justice students that lived in the dorm, and if another student was across campus and they had an evening class and they didn't feel comfortable walking back across campus by themselves, they could call this number, and one of the criminal justice students would go over there and would walk with them, because, I mean, there's safety in numbers, and that's really they were escorting them back to their dorms so that maybe something wouldn't happen. Now, we never had an incident of a student getting attacked on campus, but we had good lighting. We actually had security, and we had these escort programs that worked really good. So those are some examples of ways to try to prevent an assault from happening. Arson is when something is maliciously or purposely set on fire, either to get back at somebody in order to destroy something, or maybe to collect insurance or something, insurance money, something like that. Motives may be revenge, may be terrorism, may be financial gain, or even to hide another crime. All those are good motives for arson. How do you prevent it? The same as you prevent anything else. You increase security in the areas where either a fire has been started in the past, or a place likely to have a fire started, such as basements, storerooms, copy rooms, utility closets. And sometimes it's employees that do this as well. They're trying to get back at an employer for something. Maybe they didn't feel like they were treated exactly right. And sometimes it's just a disgruntled person, or maybe they feel like this company or this corporation has done them wrong in some way, and so they feel like, well, I'll just burn it down. Proper physical controls and procedural controls go a long way to preventing arson as well. White collar crime, fraud, computer crime. I'm really going to kind of lump all that together, because typically you have the same security person who is going to be in charge of trying to prevent all of that. We call that information assurance now. We used to call it, in fact, for a long time we call it IT security, internet technology security. Then it was information technology security, and now it's information assurance. Is typically kind of the buzzword that we use there to try to prevent all of that. We're trying to protect the information. And not only are we trying to protect what's written down and kept in files, we're also trying to protect what's held electronically by the company. Trade secrets can be stolen. There can be snooping by employees. There can be the alteration or change of data. Or even misrepresentation of actual hours worked by employees. They think they can manipulate a time clock. They may very well do that. There's a lot of different types of fraud and white collar crime. There can be embezzlement. There can be taking of property that belongs to the employer. There can be even calling in sick when you're not sick is considered fraud, or saying you got injured on the job and trying to collect a settlement from your employer because of an on the job injury. I've done hundreds of cases where I followed those people around, workers' comp people who were trying to get a settlement, saying they were injured on the job and now they couldn't work. Their level of activity had gone way down, and I'd follow them around and catch them doing all these things they weren't supposed to be doing, and videotape them doing it. And then, of course, they thought that was really interesting when you brought that to court, when they said they couldn't do this and couldn't do that, and I said, au contraire. Yes, you can. I followed a lady around for 9 days one time, and I got paid $600 a day to follow her around for 9 days. She had supposedly slipped on her own mop water. She was an assistant manager at Kentucky Fried Chicken. Supposedly slipped on her own mop water, fell and hurt her back, and said she couldn't work. So what did she do? While she was out on workers' comp collecting a check and then trying to get a big settlement, I caught her working as an assistant manager at another KFC that didn't belong to the same franchise. what did I do? I took put a camera in a bag, put a newspaper around it, went and got me some food, sat at the table, pointed the camera at her, and filmed her mopping the floor, working behind the counter, doing all this stuff. Followed her and her husband to the lake one day. They went out on a boat. I paid some guy $20 to take me out on his boat, and I got lots of videotape of her water skiing. And supposedly she could not even walk correctly because of a back injury. So, I mean, that's a multi-million-dollar industry just following insurance fraud people around. So that's another type of loss that an employer could have happen is fraud by an employee. So all of these are typically, and it's the same security professional that will handle computer crime, fraud, or any white collar crime. All right, now we need to talk about a couple things that are really important: expelling, detaining, searching, and arresting. Understand that as a security officer, you would have no more rights than any other citizen does. Out in the world. Now, on your employer's grounds, you may have the ability to search. You may have the ability to put someone off of the property. You may have the ability to detain someone until law enforcement gets there. And in a necessary case, you may have the ability to take custody of a person and actually hold them for a crime that you saw them commit. However, all of that is done under the guise of a citizen's arrest, and you're not really given any special or expanded powers of arrest like a police officer is. So it's important to know the limitations of a security professional, what you can do and what you can't do. Many states do allow security personnel to detain suspected shoplifters, and that is temporary. That's a temporary detention. Many employers, many retail stores don't do that because they know the liability that can occur if you try to hold someone against their will. So many times they will just ask you to get a photograph or a video or a good complete description of the person, the vehicle they left in, the tag number, so that while the police are on their way, they can find and stop that person. Some employers, some stores, facilities do say, take them into custody. We're not gonna allow shoplifting or theft to occur. So you see somebody doing it, you take them into custody. Many states also allow the security professional to make a citizen's arrest of persons who have committed a misdemeanor or a felony in their presence. Many states allow citizens arrest of persons who have probable cause committed a felony, where you don't even see a felony. But you have investigated it, and you believe that person has committed a felony. You can arrest that person and hold them until law enforcement gets there. Just understand, it is a citizen's arrest. You have no immunity if you cause injury, or if they sue you for false imprisonment or something like that. So you have to be very judicious in your use of making an arrest as a security officer. In fact, I don't recommend it. If you can get away without making an arrest, don't, because the chances of you getting sued if you make an arrest are very high. Chances of you winning your lawsuit are not as high. So the odds are against you, and I would typically say don't make an arrest unless you're forced into a corner. I worked security several years ago. I've conducted hundreds or thousands of security patrols on foot, in a car. One of those jobs, I worked in a low-income, government-subsidized apartment complex, i.e. the projects, and I made one arrest. And the arrest that I made wasn't because of what I caught the guy doing. It was because of what he did to the security officers when we caught him doing something wrong. I caught him stealing the tag off of a car, and when he was confronted about it, instead of running, he attacked. And because he attacked my partner, I took him into custody. I handcuffed him and told him he was under arrest for assault, disorderly conduct, and theft. I called the police, and the police came and took him away. And actually, I never even had to go to court on it. He pled guilty to everything, and chalked it up to, at that time, he was a trustee of modern chemistry, and didn't really have any problems out of him from that point forward. But that was the one and only arrest I've ever made as a security officer. I've made thousands of arrests as a police officer, and I've only been sued 2 or 3 times for things that I've done as a police officer, and I've never lost a lawsuit. So if you can keep from arresting somebody, it's always a good thing to do that. Use of force is also a critical part of being a private security professional. You're not allowed to use force the same way a police officer is. You are allowed to defend yourself, but it can only be used when and to the extent it's necessary. Deadly force can only be used to protect human life. And I would suggest not using force until you have received proper training. When I was a very young security officer, they gave me a PR-24 baton. We don't use those anymore. That's a side handle baton made famous by the LAPD. I had handcuffs, a flashlight, pepper gas, and they issued me a police-style duty belt. We had police-style uniforms, and then told us to go out and be security. I received absolutely zero training on how to use that baton, zero training on how to use that pepper gas, zero training on how to use those handcuffs, how to properly handcuff someone, and that sets up the company for extreme liability if you do not train your people in the use of their equipment and the proper use of force. We had zero training in regard to use of force as well. All right. That, in a nutshell, is Chapter 9. And I want to go and talk about Chapter 10 here for just a moment. All right. Chapter 10 is, I'm just going to kind of scratch the surface on this because I want to make sure you read it. When prevention fails, investigating, reporting, and testifying. Prevention is the focus of security. However, prevention only goes so far. You're not going to be able to prevent everything. When something does happen, you are going to need to investigate it, report it, and in some cases testify in court about what you saw. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. In fact, I'm not even going to go through the slides. You can go through the slides yourself. It's pretty straightforward. I want you to read it. If anybody has questions about investigating, reporting, or testifying, reach out to me. I would highly recommend taking a criminal investigation course in college, maybe even a criminalistics course or crime scene investigation course, taking a report writing course, a technical writing course, or something like that where you have to do some writing. You have to report on something, because a good report is worth its weight in gold. If a report has too many holes in it, or it didn't say everything you did, and you get up and you try to testify saying, well, I did this, well, that's not in your report, the court's probably going to discount it. Whatever it is that you say you did, they're going to say, we don't believe you did it because you didn't put it in your report. Writing a good report is a key element to protecting yourself and your company against liability and lawsuits, and and anything else. So, anytime a report is necessary, write that report well. And then testifying, it gives you some tips for testifying in this chapter. After you read it, after you study it and look at it, if you have questions, problems, issues, or concerns, please reach out to me, and I will see you in discussions. Have a good 4th of July weekend, guys. Be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.